Hi, welcome to the Etiquette Show, our entree to the world of culture, gender, sexuality, tradition, business, and so much more. Hi, I'm Regina Gershman.
And I'm Dr. Sam Dubé. Together, we're going to take you on an extraordinary journey with engaging people from around the world, starting from right here in Ottawa, the capital of Canada.
Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to the Etiquette Show. I'm Conchetta Rose. Kristin Richardson Jordan is a third-generation Harlemite. Kristin is now a book-printing poet, teaching artist, author, and activist in the Harlem community. Running for New York City Council, District 9 Harlem, with her campaign, Disrupt the District, is Kristin Richardson Jordan. Kristin, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hi, Conchetta. Thank you for having me on. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get right to it. Tell us a little bit about your background. Were you always interested in politics? How did that come about for you?
So I've really come full circle, because if you had asked me even just 5 years ago, I would have said, no way. There's no way I was ever going to run for office, and I was not going to do anything in electoral politics. I was very turned off by electoral politics, and understandably, the same way the people are. You know, it's a lot of corruption. It's a lot of special interests, and just feeling like those who are politicians have, for the most part, sold out our community. And so if I actually want to serve people, I should not do politics. So the turning point for me, because I was actually very engaged in high school. So that's a little bit of backstory. So in high school, I was very engaged in politics. And then when I went away to college, I went to Brown University and I did Black Studies, and I learned a lot. I always knew a lot, but I learned even more about history and heritage and culture and Black liberation and freedom struggles and democratic socialism and abolition. And as my consciousness grew, my interest in electoral politics really shrank. And it was only a couple of years ago with the elections of the Squad that I really started to feel inspired by the political arena. And that's because, you know, when we have voices like Ilhan Omar and AOC and Rashid Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley, and now hopefully if she wins, Nina Turner in Ohio, then you know it's just seeing these powerful voices of women of color running for office with these really radical platforms and winning their races, and that opened up my imagination to the possibility of running for office in a radical way that I didn't think was possible before. So that's really where politically, that's really where the inspiration came. Now, personally, I am a survivor of domestic violence and false arrests and a lot of things in my personal life. And when I started working on my healing journey a few years back, for those of us who are survivors, we know that it's about recentering yourself, right? Because in that abusive relationship, you were overextending, you were giving towards that other person. So for me, part of recentering myself was finding my calling, and I am a woman of faith and spirit, and I do feel called to serve. And I just felt a pull towards public service in this way, to be a true public servant and not our typical traditional politician.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah. What a journey for you. Like you said, a personal journey, but also outward journey as well. And that's amazing. So why now? Why City Council now?
So in this seat in particular, District 9, Central Harlem, there is an incumbent. So it's very interesting race because unlike many races throughout the city, we have 35 open seats. This is not one of them. So the interesting thing in this race is that we do have an incumbent, but I got in the race 2 years back as a challenger for a variety of reasons, wanting to serve, but also because the incumbent in this seat voted for de Blasio's plan for jail expansion and new jails. So And that for me just goes so against the heart of what I believe in, to allocate $10 billion to new jail cells when we are missing money in sanitation, missing money on education, when I am in the heart of Harlem and our community is so impacted by over-policing and by mistreatment and abuse by police officers, and by some of the just chronic failings of this huge prison industrial complex. All the output of white supremacy we can see exemplified here in Central Harlem. So to have a rep that actually voted for, in my opinion, the continued oppression of our community, totally unacceptable. So that really motivated me in terms of the why now, to get in this as a challenger, to push, actually even before George Floyd, to push for reallocation of funds away from NYPD and jails. The movement of the past year has only added fuel to my fire, which was already going around where we allocate funds and really putting it in the right places. The other thing, and I want to say it particularly here because of your show and your network, is that I am an out queer woman, and this seat has never seen that. We've actually never had an out LGBTQ person in this seat in Central Harlem. And yet our community is here, right? Black and gay is here. Black queer people are here. And we deserve representation. And to put margins towards the center is what's going to revolutionize our government, to start thinking about those who have been left out and put us in the center. It's going to lead to changes for literally everyone, not just the LGBTQ community, but literally everyone, in a revolutionary way. And if I win this seat, I will be the first Black queer woman to run and win a seat on New York City Council, which is just awesome.
Oh, yeah. Please get out and vote. I'm going to say that a lot now, but come on. So I agree with you. I think, everything that you mentioned about, females kind of taking charge here, and it's about time. It's about time. And I think, again, this is just my humble opinion, but I think in order to create change, in order to inspire change, we need something to change before we see that change, such as a beautiful woman like yourself up in there and getting in charge and taking control of the situation. How are we going to see that unless we see a different face, a different kind of attitude, a different kind of campaign, which I would like to rotate to right now. Kristin's Disrupt the District campaign for NYC Council to represent District 9 is comprised of 7 focus areas simplified in the acronym HARLEM, HARLEM. So let's, if we can, break that down for our viewers here. So H, hold police accountable and abolition. Can you go into that a little bit, Kristin?
Yes, definitely. So the H in my platform is about holding police accountable with the elected civilian review board, giving the local community firing and suspension power over the local police. So it would be true police accountability. It is seen as a rather radical take, but it's not. I am a proud radical, but it's not that radical a thought to actually hold police accountable. If we're just being honest, literally every job on the planet has some measure of accountability, and it is with police. It seems to be only this only space where we say, okay, well, the police are going to police themselves. We're not going to have any real measure of accountability. So I'm pushing for accountability and actual power, not just, another barbecue on the street with the police athletic league, but actual power to be given to the people to be able to hold police accountable, along with a reallocation of funds. And understanding that ideal budget is zero for NYPD, because what we need to do is build up our social services, mental emotional health services, treatment, mental health street teams, education, housing, and build up that presence of community care and support and resources to a level where we actually don't need this violent arm of the state.
Do you have an opinion on a lot of people are talking about there are too many police, there are too many positions for them. Do you have an opinion that there are too many cops?
Yeah.
There?
Yes, I do think there are too many cops, and I think we need to really revolutionize the way we think about safety, to look at other alternatives to create safety in our communities, other than allowing violence to continue and then having a police force that is also violent to curb the violence. We're just multiplying the violence with the strategy we have now. We really need to emphasize prevention.
Okay. So A, actually affordable housing. Now, what do you mean by that?
So I have fun with this one because people tease me about the actually affordable, but unfortunately, affordable housing needs a qualifier because we have been lying about what is affordable, especially in this district. In Central Harlem, the metrics for determining what is quote unquote affordable housing are being set borough-wide. So we're being lumped in with Midtown and Downtown. We need to have the designations done by zip code so that the affordability actually matches the income levels in this district. In addition to that, I am for universal rent stabilization in general. I am also for homes guarantee. Housing is a human right, housing the homeless in homes, not just shelters, because shelters have become big business. We need to give people permanent housing instead. Total revamp of the ULURP process and a moratorium on new developments without a racial impact study, but also until we actually figure out how we can have the community have a significant voice in any developments that are taking place.
So power back to the people.
Yes.
Yeah. R, redistributing wealth and resources to those most in need.
Yes, so I am a democratic socialist. So I do embrace the label, but even for those who don't embrace that label, I think you'd be hard pressed to argue that we should not be redistributing resources, especially at a time like this where we have the pandemic and all the effects of it. New York City is home to approximately 1 million millionaires and 87 billionaires. So there's extreme wealth in this city. There's just way too much money here for people to be homeless or hungry, or for there not to be education, or for there not to be resources, or for there not to be a fully funded sanitation budget. There's just way too much money here for us not to have this city set up in a vastly more humane way.
L, living longer. You have gun control and care for our seniors.
Yes, so this is one of those parts of the acronym where we've squeezed in two focus areas. The gun control is really a push for violence intervention, possibly buyback programs, but also what we can do to redirect energy and especially youth in very positive ways, and also how we can do like restorative justice models to address violence as opposed to, as I said earlier, as opposed to the police. And then on the other side of that, senior care, it was very important to me as someone who's worked with seniors for the past 7 years to have something specifically for seniors in Harlem, because our senior community, they matter. There needs to be emphasis on senior housing. There needs to be advocates at the local senior centers. And these are some of the things in my senior care platform, which I'm very proud to say I worked on with seniors at Central Harlem Senior Center and A. Philip Randolph Senior Center, which are two in-district senior centers where I've worked at in the past. So just building off of that and really having a senior care package.
See, I really appreciate you saying that you worked with seniors to discuss senior issues. I do observe in our society that there seems to be a pointing out of a problem and then someone else addressing the problem instead of going into the heart of the problem and saying, hey, you guys have opinions, don't you?
Yes.
So your focus there.
Yeah, we need to do more of that, like centering the impacted community in what it be.
Yeah, absolutely. E, education for all and environmental justice.
Yes. So again, two focus areas. The environmental justice. I'm honored to be endorsed by Sunrise Movement, and it's just a matter of Centering environment and addressing environmental racism, particularly in District 9, there are a couple very specific issues. There were over 200 trash cans that were removed from this district, from District 9. The reasoning behind it was the quote, misuse of the trash cans by those who were houseless. So instead of addressing poverty and food insecurity, the plan was to just, remove these cans. But of course, it's contributed to a huge sanitation problem. The cuts to sanitation in general, sanitation was cut by $26 million. That budget has to be restored. We also received less trash pickups here in Central Harlem. We also need to retrofit the NYCHA buildings. There needs to be a NYCHA Green New Deal to have environmentally sustainable and accessible NYCHA housing. I also am for public utilities as well, and for just supporting and improving our green space throughout the district.
Absolutely. And, these issues that you're addressing, while they are focused in Central Harlem, they benefit all around as well. It's not just Harlem that's going to benefit from this. It's like a domino effect, to all the surrounding neighborhoods, and then
yes,
potentially the whole city altogether, so.
Yes, absolutely. And I wanted to add for education, the model, I've been a teacher the past 10 years, and the model that I am pushing forward is a community school model where the school becomes a one-stop shop for the kids and their families. So not just academics, but we actually look at healthcare for the family, housing for the family, connections between the school and local nonprofits. The critique that's been made about a community school model is that it is expensive, to which I just continuously say that we need to pay it, that the children are worth it, the families are worth it. And we need to pay to have a really robust quality education for all, instead of this really two-tier system of education, which is segregated and class-based, and it's what we're living in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And M, meaningful change.
Yes. So this last one is not a policy focus area, but just the M in Harlem and talking about overall meaningful change. My campaign is very unique in that we're a grassroots movement-based campaign. It is shown just through our numbers in terms of donors and volunteers. We are very much movement-based because my background is organizing. I don't have ties to the political machine. I'm not someone who is about, okay, let me schmooze with the right people. It's not about who you know. It's about organizing in powerful community with really strong ideas. And that's the kind of meaningful change I want to bring to the seat as well. An open city council seat where people in the community feel they can come and go, where we have regular assemblies that are open to all, that inform the policy, and where there is really a organizing base and a community-centered approach, as opposed to just one individual sort of reigning over everyone else, which is, to be perfectly honest, traditionally what we have had in this seat.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's how, as a layperson, that's how I tend to think of government, that they're up here and they're in charge and what they say goes. And my opinion, although I am an active voter, I get involved in my community, I do feel like there's always a stop point where I can go up to here and then someone's going to say, nope, sorry, sit back down, and I just think the concept of government for the people, with the people,
yes,
by the people, for the people, that's what they wrote a billion days ago, you know what I mean? So it feels like, what's the issue with getting back around to that, do you think? Why is there resistance to that?
Oh, I think the resistance to, what I would call sort of co-governance with people is that folks get stuck on the power in these positions. And not for nothing, I'm running to be a public servant, and it's this radical idea that we're going to serve people with public office. But it shouldn't be that crazy a thought. And we have a lot of our elected leaders who have taken donations from certain wealthy individuals who have special interests in mind, and they get elected. And, you know, it's sort of a situation where you and yours are on the come up, but everybody else is left right where they are. And I think we've had a lot of ego in government and a lot of, I'm going to say it, patriarchy, you know, a lot of patriarchy, and a lot of that toxic masculine energy that has controlled our government for a very long time, and that doesn't yield to building in collaboration with the community.
Right, for sure. Well, let's get more women in there, shall we?
Exactly.
I mean,
our energy, female energy.
That we are the stronger sex. No offense, fellas, but there's a lot more that we do that you guys are kind of not privy to. So let's get more women who are thinking of others by natural instincts and trying to get others involved by natural instinct up in there, like for sure. I want to ask you, what do you think, or how do you think in the last year and a half almost, the pandemic has either charged your campaign or fueled your campaign or affected it and changed your campaign?
Oh, the pandemic has absolutely charged my campaign, and it's been very exciting. It's very tragic that it takes something like that, like the pandemic. But COVID and the effects of COVID and the highlighting of these really structural issues, the highlighting of health inequality through COVID and housing inequality through COVID is like all this existed before, but it has definitely charged my campaign in that people really have been waking up and really looking for something different. I think the George Floyd case and the movement for defund has also charged the campaign. I mean, I received a huge influx of volunteers when our current city councilman voted for the new budget, which did not defund NYPD. And so people were looking for the alternative, and they signed up. And as I said before, this was stuff that I believed in and was advocating for before it was popular and before it was George Floyd movement and before all of that. But this went from being, you know, really quite a fringe campaign to being a real contender, you know, where I'm now in the lead with grassroots donations and really have a very real and possible shot at the seat. And like I said, it's a shame that it takes a pandemic for things like this to be highlighted, but sometimes, you know, the universe sometimes gives us an opening, and it's meant to be a lesson. It's meant to be an opportunity for us to come together to build things back, not like they were before, but better than they were before.
Absolutely. Very well put. So, Kristin, tell our friends, how can they donate to your campaign? Where can they find you?
Yes, so I am Kristin for Harlem on all platforms. That's Kristin, 2 I's, because my eyes are wide open. Kristin. Kristin for Harlem on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on the web as well. Yes. The biggest thing we need right now are volunteers. So if you're listening and you're able to get involved, you know, please come and sign up. We have a get involved form right on the website, and lots of ways to help out. Phone banking, text banking. We do free community events. We do outreach. It's just, you know, it's a good time, and you get to meet a lot of people, and you also get to help this campaign make some change.
It's amazing. Kristin, thank you so much for being here with us today. We so appreciate your time, and best of luck to you. And I hope to see you, you know, I don't know, what do you have? A gavel? No, that's a judge. But, you know, like, you know, your imaginary sword, you know what I mean? And you're just in charge. I pray and hope that I see that. So best of luck to you. And thank you again so much for your time here with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate the platform.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Hello, Dr. Sam Dubé here for the Etiquette Show on Manhattan Neighborhood News, and I'm joined today by one of our New York City 2021 mayoral candidates, Art Chang. Thank you, Art, for coming and joining us today.
Sam, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Tell you what, well, how about this? Why don't I mention a key word or two, and if you could comment to the keywords, I think maybe we can cover a fair amount of ground. How's that sound?
Perfect.
Okay. Violent crime in New York. What has been the trend, actually? I thought crime had diminished, violent crime, under Giuliani, and then there's been a resurgence of at least murders under...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, before COVID, the city was experiencing an unprecedented level of peace and nonviolence. Right, both violent crimes and nonviolent crimes were way down at historic lows. And then COVID happened, and it started to uptick a little bit just before COVID. And then COVID happened, and we had this quiescent period. And then all of a sudden, once things started opening up, the crimes level just started skyrocketing. And it wasn't crimes across the board. Nonviolent crimes are still pretty low. But violent crimes, shootings, are really, really high right now. Double what they were last year for sure. Still, we're a long way from the peak that it was in 1990, but it's still much, much higher, and people, I think, rightfully are very, very concerned. So there are a few things that have to get done. I'll tie three things together. There was an event in Times Square an incident in Times Square last weekend, where two brothers, 18 years old, had a dispute. And for some reason, they decided they were going to kill each other in front of the police station in Times Square, one of the most visible police stations in the city. And they luckily didn't kill each other or anybody else, but they did injure four innocent people. Right, bystanders, and injected fear into the whole neighborhood. I want to talk about that actually in the context of anti-Asian hate, because as we also know, anti-Asian hate has been skyrocketing. Right, it is 10x what it was last year, which is 10x what it was the year before. And so there's this issue about the most violent crimes and the violence that are being directed against people who look like you and me. And then the third thing I want to talk about is actually my own experience growing up with domestic violence, because there is a connection. There is a cycle of violence that is happening within each of those three settings. But let's talk about the police first.
Okay.
Clearly, the police are important in terms of responding to incidents of violence. But in the first case, in the Times Square incident, what could the police have done, right, to prevent this? Right. So they've been out really aggressively trying to remove guns from the street. But this problem between these two young men was not a problem that was visible to the police. And it was probably not a problem that the police could have solved. The second problem, anti-Asian violence. We know that the vast majority of the most violent crimes against Asians are by people who have mental illness. So we have a mentally ill homeless population that the city has not done enough to address. We have to implement, an immediate increase of at least 10,000 beds of supportive housing for mentally ill homeless people. And we need to figure out how to address the mental health crisis that the whole city is experiencing. And this is just a tip of the iceberg. But you're not going to solve, the police are not going to solve this. You could assign a police officer to every single Asian person in New York, right, and that's not going to solve the problem. Right. And the police are not going to solve the problem of, how anti-Asian hate actually arose. Right? We can't do that. We're going to have education. We're going to have to give people a sense of empathy for the histories of the folks who make up New York City. Right. Now, the reason I bring this back to my experience with domestic violence is that I know firsthand the personal toll that, living in violence can take. That when you live in violence and you live with the sense of inability to look out for your loved ones, when you see violence happening in front of your eyes as a child and you're really powerless to prevent this, this causes a lot of internal damage. This causes a lot of psychological damage. My father had PTSD coming from Korea. My mother's father was assassinated at the dawn of the Korean War. So this is a multi-generational problem. And I would guarantee you that for those two boys in Times Square, that this is also a multi-generational problem. And for the folks who are expressing anti-Asian hate, this is a multi-generational problem. So we need to stop these cycle of violence. And I know that I'm not poor. I'm not a Black American. It took a lot of intensive effort to enable me to have a life as a happy, joyful, productive human being. But I would say that didn't happen for me until I was about 30. So if it was that hard for me, how hard is it going to be for the rest of New York, or actually for the rest of the world? So we need to look at this in a way where we're thinking about this from these kind of from the full context of how violence erupts. So in some, yes, we do need some immediate intervention, and yes, people who inflict violence should be punished, absolutely. But we also need to have this intensive, coordinated effort to be able to address these problems. And, you asked about how my experience on my professional experience ties into this. Well, all the work that I did on Case Commons was to be able to create these intensive, coordinated efforts to bring services to families who are the most troubled. I know we can do that. That's the foundation that Community Solutions rests on to solve homelessness. We know this thing works, and so we can do this. And I believe that when I'm mayor, it won't happen overnight, but when I'm mayor, we are going to have a much more peaceful city.
So Art, wow, you addressed my next three keywords of policing, anti-Asian violence, and homelessness right there, just when I mentioned violent crime. I don't think you could really argue against your comment. I think it's a matter of degree. Your solution to deal with violent crime is to break the cycle of violence, often multi-generational, and you want to allocate resources to that end, which means cutting resources from other places, potentially. And I think that perhaps there's an argument as to the degree with which the familial, you won't get an argument from me. As a physician, I will tell you right away, childhood, it defines you. It really does. Your childhood experiences. There's absolutely no question. What is up in the air is, how you metabolize those experiences. And sometimes you feel you have a choice and sometimes you feel you don't have a choice, but you can make some conscious decisions to deal with certain traumas and things. But anyway, I digress. Point being is you may get other candidates or other people saying, well, we're going to approach it from this perspective instead of, breaking the cycle of violence at the family level, the multi-generational level. So what do you have to say to people who say, well, the solution, for instance, isn't taking money from the police force or retraining them. The solution is to get everyone to carry more weaponry, right? Or guns. What about people who we need to crack down more. We need to have more patrols. We need to put more money. What do you say to people who they may not disagree with what you're saying? They may just approach it from a different perspective at a different level. It sounds like you're trying to approach it from a really fundamental level, which may or may not be proper, right?
But also not giving up on immediate response. People are in crisis. You have to address it.
So how would you address that? Immediate response.
Yeah, I'm not proposing to eliminate the police.
No, you did. I know you never said that. No.
Yeah. So what we need to do is we need to have police do what they want, what they're supposed to do, what we pay them to do. We need to also, excuse me, we know 94% of 911 calls do not require armed response. So we need to think differently about having unarmed response for the majority of those calls. But, this is kind of the aspect of what I would think about as demilitarizing the police, because the police are trained to have a military-like action, that there's a threat and a response. And so we want them to think about this instead as a problem, and that they're there to help facilitate a solution, and then maybe to deal with the response. But it's not as simple as training. One of my opponents is actually very focused on training, convinced that will work. I believe it's a governance issue. That today, in New York City, the police chief is the sole arbiter of discipline for the entire department. So if there is even a demonstrated complaint against an officer and a recommendation for that officer's discipline, that police commissioner can make his or her own decision about what to do.
Okay.
And, what we know, as anybody who's ever run a company knows, that one of your primary abilities to have discipline within your company among all your employees is ability to hire and fire. You hire for the right mindset. And then if people just cannot adapt to that, and then you have to let them go. And if they do things that are counter to the policies and counter to the end result that you're trying to achieve, and then they have to get fired. There's no way about it. And so if the police chief has that sole ability and doesn't actually take action, and then we have a problem. So I'm proposing three things. Number one, I think, by the way, the mayor should not have the sole power to appoint a police chief. I propose that actually the city council should ratify the mayor's nomination of a police chief. The second thing is that there should be a completely independent police complaint investigation body that also has audit powers over the police department. And then following up on that is that we need to have a completely independent adjudicatory body to make decisions about some of these disputes. Because that way we can hold the police accountable and we can ensure that we weed out the bad apples that are in the police force today. I spoke about demilitarization. And then the third thing is that we have to orient toward communities in crisis. The city has this phenomenal tech system called CompStat, which tracks crisis in all these communities. Only the police department uses that. And why is that? Right? Shouldn't mental health and social workers and, others look at this? People, I often get asked this question about, the segregation in the school system. I say, well, the school system's segregated. Well, it's because communities are segregated. And so if I want to restore equity to schools, I actually need to bring equity to communities. All these things are tied together. They're interconnected. They're interlinked. And so you can't solve this one problem. You got to solve it in the middle of the interconnections between these problems. And I think that's a fundamental mindset difference between me and every other candidate.
I would agree. It's a fundamental mindset difference between you and a lot of political candidates everywhere. And it's refreshing to hear that admission, actually, and that understanding of the interrelationship and the interdependence of these issues, and not beating around the bush and not making grand sweeping statements either about claiming to be able to heal them or rectify or fix them by throwing a little bit of money into one particular specific area. I mentioned one issue and you've covered five from that. Okay.
It's because that's the way it should be.
Yeah. That's very telling.
It's like there's no issue that stands alone, that they all tie in among themselves. And, and this is again, another reason why we can't have a politician as our next mayor, because a politician likes to have great ideas, and there are many of them. They like to go from press conference to press conference promoting their ideas, but to make change happen, you actually have to implement them. And the implementation, to me, is what's really interesting and fun, but it's also incredibly hard, and it doesn't happen overnight.
One thing I did want to talk about when you mentioned homelessness briefly and needing to create more beds and shelter. with the COVID crisis, rents, mortgages, evictions, foreclosures, can you speak to this a little bit, Art?
Absolutely. New York City is standing on the edge of a cliff, and it is about to push hundreds of thousands of people off the side of that cliff. And here's specifically what I mean. Over 300,000 cases are pending in housing court.
Ooh.
That is like the equivalent of Boston. There's been a rent moratorium for residents and also for small businesses. It's kicking the can down the road, but if you're a recipient of that moratorium, you are accruing debt. As of 30 days ago, there was over $2 billion worth of accrued debt in the city, which tenants are supposed to pay to the landlords. So the problem here is you have the poorest people in the city who are shouldering this debt that they're unable to repay. And then you have the landlords who haven't received that money.
Yeah.
And many of those landlords are not big corporations. Many of them are immigrants, smaller landlords, or retirees who have a renter in their ground floor and who are not getting that money, which is essential for them to pay their mortgages, pay their property taxes, do other things. And then we have almost $1 billion worth of unpaid property taxes. So you look at this whole problem and you go, wow, this is really, really, really like impossible, which is why the politicians keep kicking the can down the road. So here it is August. Here it is May, and this is being extended to August, and this is going to be extended further. So how are we going to fix this problem? It's just everyone's just kind of holding their breath, and maybe the federal government is going to dump $5 billion on New York City to kind of erase this problem. But given where we are with the divided Senate, do I think that's going to happen? I'm not sure. And so what are you doing in the meantime? Right, because the city needs to move forward. These small businesses need to move forward. People still have this stress from this overhang. And, that stress also translates into mental health, and it translates into anger. It translates into really community.
Even crime, right?
So I have a very simple idea. Not every building has mortgages, but most do, of some size or another. And my idea is like this. We basically take the mortgage, and we basically tear it, and we extend out one side of it, creating an empty space in the middle. So we add a year or two at the end of mortgages, creating a zero payment period in the middle.
So so what about interest then? Is that what you're just addressing here?
Everything. Zero payment. And obviously there'll be nuances, but what happens here is people can stay in their homes. Small businesses can stay in their stores and businesses. It means that landlords won't have to pay a mortgage, so they can stay in their buildings. They can retain ownership, and then they can pass the benefits through to the tenants and erase the debt. Right? Because under this scenario, the tenants owe debt. All of a sudden, you zero it out. You've zeroed out that debt. Right? We know we can do that.
How would you enact that idea?
Because, you have, let's say you have a year's worth of rent at, $5,000 a month. And then all of a sudden you say, okay, that's worth $0 a month. So your debt of $5,000 a month is gone.
No, I get that part, but I mean, how would you enact it with the banks?
Oh, well, so the city can't do it by legislation. This is why you need a mayor who thinks like a finance person and who has the ability to work with the private sector. I know the banks would be very interested in a holistic solution that encompasses multiple properties across the board in New York City, because then you have enough scale to actually apply some of this effort to it. I also know that a lot of these mortgages have been securitized. And so there are servicers, many of whom are based right here in New York City, who control the disposition of those mortgages. So we can do these things through conversations with the financial sector, right? But you can't even actually have a solution if you don't have those conversations. And maybe that won't be the final solution, but it's a conversation, and the ability to have that educated conversation with the financial services sector is the only way to actually lead to this kind of relief.
Right.
And then, by the way, when you have those outstanding property tax payments or water bill payments, which the city also controls, well, the city can do forbearance for property owners and say, okay, we are going to, if you are really having hardship, sign this forbearance agreement, and the city can turn around and borrow against the debt. Because you have property secured by their deeds, you can go out and get debt at 99 cents, or more to the dollar. So why doesn't the city just do that? And a lot of this is just very elemental thinking that are things that are kind of natural to somebody who has a finance mind, but is not natural to somebody who spent their career in politics.
Right.
Right. These are real solutions that require real discussion. And you have to know the people and trust them. And then when they come to the table with a proposed solution, you have to be able to look at that solution and make a judgment as to whether they're trying to fleece the public sector or not. And if you have an experienced, savvy person at the head, the chances of the city being taken advantage of are far, far, far lower.
That's a really intriguing point. It would also take intestinal fortitude to sit at the table to discuss this, wouldn't it?
Well, if you have been growing up, spent your lifetime in a domestic violence family, I can tell you that you grow up, you either don't have intestinal fortitude or you have a hell of a lot of it. And, kind of across the board, negotiating with the governor of Indiana to take this project, getting Queens West into the ground, being able to deliver NYC votes, coming through the other side of bankruptcy. I feel like I have the toughness of somebody. I know a few people who have gone through what I've been through and have that kind of toughness. But we're also going to need that for the budget. I just want to say something about the budget that's super, super important, because you asked about how we're going to afford all this stuff. So just very quickly, I'll make some real interesting points. So, New York City is actually one of the largest economies in the world, despite itself. Right. We're in the top 25 largest economies. If we were a country, we'd be in the top 25 largest countries in the world. Our budget is bigger than all but 4 states of the United States.
Wow.
Right. Or if New York City were a corporation, our revenues would put us in the top 35 of all U.S. companies, and our workforce would put us in the top 15 of all U.S. companies.
Those are some intriguing stats.
It's very big and very complicated. But we look at the budget. So the most recent budget that de Blasio has proposed is $98 billion. So if the council accepts that $98 billion budget, which they likely will, it is $20 billion more than it was just 8 years ago. $20 billion more. A staggering amount of money. $1.1 billion, in my estimate, was used to pay for universal pre-K4, which is a super valuable thing. There was certainly money that was used to invest in this so-called affordable housing, but yeah, middle-class housing is super important. So that was a good use of money. Where did the rest of that money go? And you have to ask that question. The overhead and administration across the city has grown tremendously. This management style that I spoke about created all this duplication of effort, created unnecessary bureaucracy. And as a result, my belief is that there's at least $10 billion in there that is all sort of things that need to be streamlined away and have that money be reinvested in the front lines. One of the reasons why the budget is so big this year is because we have a windfall from Washington in terms of relief bills and from the state. So, what the mayor is doing is he's going to saddle the next mayor with recurring expenses, with no defined revenue stream. And so we need to actually think very differently about how we do this and how we do everything in the city. We have to be incredibly efficient. And if we don't do this, and this is my biggest fear, if we don't do this and we don't address the inequities in our city, we're going to have a recovery. I'm confident of that. But boy, is it going to have a really weak underbelly. And the foundation is going to be very weak. And in the next crisis, right, someone will sneeze and the city will fall apart again.
Or COVID-22 or 23 or, God forbid.
Exactly. So we can solve these problems. I'm so convinced of it. They are so clear to me how we can address those. And, again, my fear is that we're going to have a mayor who is not going to be capable of having these kinds of insights and this kind of conversation with all the necessary players that we need. And by the way, the thing I haven't mentioned is that we need to have a completely different communication with our communities. They have historically not been consulted on anything from real estate development to urban planning to picking a new principal. Maybe they've been asked in lip service to fix the actual letter of the law, but true collaboration has not existed in this city as long as I can remember. I've been here for 35 years, but we have an opportunity to actually do that with somebody who knows how to do user collaboration, right? Collaboration with the end users for the benefit of our system, right? Our system of government, our system of technology, all of our systems.
So this seems to be a big impetus to your platform is decentralization, accountability by consulting with the end users, in this case, the populace, working collaboration, having oversight that is more spread out so you don't get individuals with all this power and potentially making mistakes, the ability to identify issues with individuals that might be, souring the milk, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess instead of decentralization, I would say more integration.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so I guess it depends on your perspective there, but I like that word. Integration. Okay, I'm going to shift gears here for a moment and mention a word to you, and you can tell me what first pops into your head, and then I want to ask you about problems. We've already spoken mostly about this, but any other problems that are uniquely those of New York City? So my word is lockdowns. What are your thoughts and feelings on the lockdowns, the effects, social, economic, mental health, physical health, and future consequences?
The definition of a lockdown is a one-size-fits-all, top-down approach. Sometimes you have to have that. But in the future, we have to think differently about that, right? We have to think about a city that is oriented toward well-being instead of, having a sick care system instead of a healthcare system, right? We need to think about a city that is flexible and adaptive and one that meets the constituency of the city, the residents, where they are, in all kinds of different ways. We talk about, school reopening this September. And, this administration is, almost certain is going to have a one-size-fits-all top-down approach. Why does it have to be that way? Because it clearly doesn't. It can be varied based upon family preferences, based upon the interactions with the teachers union, with the principals, with the school faculties. There's so many different ways to do this. So having much more of a kind of a targeted approach is just going to be so critical to the future of this city. Again, no one size, fits all kind of thing. But which means that when we come back, we have to think about addressing people's mental health. Like, are students ready to learn? Are teachers ready to teach? Are workers ready to work? We're going to have to give people the time to grieve if they have lost loved ones. There are going to be students who are going to be parentless, right? And so how do you address their needs? We already have 30% of our students have a learning difference. We have another 10% who are homeless. right? And so we have a student body that is terribly disrupted, and then we add COVID on top of that. So we need to think about each of these different populations and give them what they need where they are, and be able to have the system flex to them instead of forcing them to adapt to a rigid system.
Tell us your website again if people are interested in learning more about you and your platform.
My website is at chang.nyc, and I offer Zoom open office hours to anybody who comes to the site.
I noticed that.
Scroll all the way down to the bottom of the homepage and click on the Meet Art button, and you can sign up for my Zoom open office hours.
Talk about accessible.
I've had hundreds of people stop by. It's how I think a mayor should be, accessible to the people. I've had many high school students stop by, and people of all kinds. And some people come just because they can't believe a mayoral candidate would allow anyone to come talk to them.
Yeah, that's really something. Could you repeat the website again? There was just a little blurb in the audio when you said it.
Sure.
Repeat that again.
Yeah, my website is at www.chang.nyc, and I offer Zoom open office hours that you can book right at the bottom of the homepage.
Gotcha. Wonderful. So, Art, is there anything else? Any passing thought? A quote?
Man, I could talk for another hour. I mean, we could talk about climate. We could talk about, the Hasidic yeshiva education problem. I could talk about traffic.
Well, maybe I'll hold you to that, Art. Maybe we'll do another interview. The election is
great.
Well, off. If
if your audience is clamoring for more of me, then I'm happy to deliver.
More Art Chang, we shall see, and I'll let you know. But in any case, it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you so much, Art Chang, and I wish you all the best. And for those of you interested, please check out Art Chang's website. I'm Dr. Stan Dubé for the Etiquette Show. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our viewers, and we'll catch you again next time. Be safe.
Thanks so much. Have a good weekend.
Oh.